"That case," said Warren, obeying a quick signal from his accomplice, "I'll stroll in the garden while you present Mr. Jones to Livius." Colonel Graham led the way to a lofty wing, once used as a drawing-room, but now the repository for thousands of books, which not only filled the shelves but were heaped up in every corner. "I must apologize for this confusion, sir," said the host. "No one is permitted to arrange my books but myself, and my efforts, I fear, serve only to make confusion more confounded. There are 4 other rooms even more chaotic than this." At the sound of his voice, a man who had been seated behind a tumulus of volumes rose and stood. Average Jones looked at him keenly. He was perhaps 45 years of age, thin and sinewy, with a close-shaven face, pale blue eyes, and a narrow forehead running high into a mop of grizzled locks. Diagonally across the front part of the scalp a scar could be dimly perceived through the hair. Average Jones glanced at the stranger's hands to gain, if possible, some hint of his former employment. With his faculty of swift observation, he noticed that the long, slender fingers were not only mottled with dust, but also scuffed, and in places scarified, as if their owner had been hurriedly handling a great number of books. Colonel Graham presented the newcomer in formal Latin. He bowed. The scarred man made a curious gesture of the hand, addressing Average Jones in an accent which, even to the young man's long unaccustomed ears, sounded strange and strained. "De illi linguam astringere mutus est," said Colonel Graham, indicating the younger man, and adding a sentence of sonorous, metrical Greek. Average Jones recalled the Aeschylean line, "Well, though a great ox hath stepped on my tongue, it hasn't trodden out my eyes, praises be," said he to himself, as he caught the uneasy glance of the Roman. By way of allaying suspicion, he scribbled upon a sheet of paper a few complimentary Latin sentences, in which Warren had sedulously coached him for the occasion, and withdrew to the front room, where he was presently joined by the John Hopkins man. Fortunately, the colonel gave them a few minutes together. "Arrange for me to come here daily to study in the library," whispered Jones to the Latin professor. The other nodded. "Now sit tight," added Jones. He stepped, soft-footed, on the thick old rug, across to the library door, and threw it open. Just inside stood Livius, an expression of startled anger on his thin face. Quickly recovering himself, he explained, in his ready Latin, that he was about to enter and speak to his patron. "Shows a remarkable interest in possible conversation," whispered Jones on his withdrawal, "for a man who understands no English. Also does me the honour to suspect me. He must have been a wily chap in the consulship of Plancus." Before leaving, Average Jones had received from Colonel Graham a general invitation to spend as much time as he chose studying among the books. The old manservant, Saul, had orders to admit him at any hour. He returned to his hotel to write a courteous note of acknowledgment. Many hours has Average Jones spent more tediously than those passed in the cool seclusion of Colonel Ridgway Graham's treasure house of print. He burrowed among quaint accumulations of forgotten classics. He dipped with astonishment into the savage and ultra-Rabelaisian satire of von Hutter's Epistola Obscurorum Virorum, which set early 16th century Europe a-roar with laughter at the discomfited monks. And he cleansed himself from that tainted atmosphere in the fresh air and free English of a splendid Audubon first, and all the time he was conscious that the Roman watched. More than once Livius offered aid, seeking to apprise himself of the supposed mute's line of investigation, but the other smilingly fended him off. At the end of 4 days, Average Jones had satisfied himself that, if Livius were seeking anything in particular, he had an indefinite task before him, for the colonel's bound treasures were in indescribable confusion. Apparently he had bought from far and near, without definite theme or purpose. As he bought, he read, and having read, cast aside, and where a volume fell, there it had license to lie. No cataloguer had ever sought to restore order to that bibliographic riot. To seek any given book meant a blind voyage, without compass or chart, throughout the mingled centuries. Often Colonel Graham spent hours in one or the other of the huge book rooms, talking with his strange protégé and making copious notes. Usually the old gentleman questioned and the other answered. But one morning the attitude seemed to the listening adviser to be reversed. Livius, in the far corner of the room, was speaking in a low tone. To judge from the older man's impatient manner, the Roman was interrupting his host's current of queries with interrogations of his own. Average Jones made a mental note, and, in conference with Warren that evening, asked him to ascertain from Colonel Graham whether Livius's inquiries had indicated a specific interest in any particular line of reading. On the following day, however, an event of more immediate import occupied his mind. He had spent the morning in an upstairs library, at the unevadable suggestion of Colonel Graham, while the colonel and his Roman collogued below. Coming down about noon, Average Jones entered the colonel's small study just in time to see Livius, who was alone in the room, turn away sharply from the desk. His elbow was held close to his ribs in a peculiar manner. He was concealing something under his coat. With a pretense of clumsiness, Average Jones stumbled against him in passing. Livius drew away, his high forehead working with suspicion. The adviser's expression of blank apology, eked out with a bow and a grimace, belied the busy working mind within. For, in the moment's contact, he had heard the crisp rustle of paper from beneath the ill-fitting coat. What paper had the man from B.C. taken furtively from his benefactor's table? It must be large, otherwise he could have readily thrust it into his pocket. No sooner was Livius out the room than Average Jones scanned the desk. His face lighted with a sudden smile. Colonel Graham never read a newspaper, boasted, in fact, that he wouldn't have one about the place. But, as Average Jones distinctly recalled, he had himself that very morning brought in a copy of the Globe, and dropped it into the scrap basket near the writing table. It was gone. Livius had taken it. "If he's got the newspaper reading habit," said Average Jones to himself, "I'll set a trap for him, but Warren must furnish the bait." He went to look up his aide. The conference between them was long and exhaustive, covering the main points of the case from the beginning. "Did you find out from Colonel Graham," inquired Average Jones, "whether Livius affected any particular brand of literature?" "Yes, he seems to be specializing in late 17th century British classicism. Apparently, he considers that the flower of British scholarship of that time wrote in a very inferior kind of dog Latin." "Late 17th century Latinity," commented Average Jones. "That gives us a fair start. Now, as to the body servant." "Old Saul? I questioned him about strange callers. He said he remembered only two, besides an occasional peddler or agent. They were looking for work." "What kind of work?" "Inside the house. One wanted to catalog the library." "What did he look like?" "Saul said he wore glasses and a worse tall hat than the colonel's, and had a full beard." "And the other?" "Bookbinder and repairer. Wanted to fix up Colonel Graham's collection. Young, smartly dressed, with a small waxed mustache." "And our Livius is clean shaven," murmured Average.